Cutting it fine. Another 2 minutes and you'd have been late.
With a happy hello to you, too.
But the thing is...
I just need some time to get my head around it.
So we must...
Pull to open.
Pull to open.
Yes, and what do you do?
We are not just going to analyse this.
What the hell are you saying?
We don't just sit here all day complaining.
Rubbish!
What is this? An intervention?
Just in time.
Is it working? Hard to explain.
I think we can succeed.
It's time, gorgeous. Phase 2.
Hello, and welcome to Pull to Open, the only Doctor Who podcast that usually proceeds randomly throughout the entire Doctor Who canon. But we are now parked. We are parked for a moment of reflection. We are looking back at season 2 of the Doctor Who that just broadcast, Ncuti Gatwa Era. But we might go a little further back than that, because that is we've kind of at a holding point. We're at a fixed point in time, if you will, in the life cycle of Doctor Who, because nothing's being made right now, and it's very ambiguous on where it's going to go in the future. And we're going to talk a little bit, not about the future, maybe a little bit, but a little bit mostly on looking back on like what has happened in the last little era. And oh, by the way, I'm Pete Pachal.
And I'm Chris Taylor, and if you're anything like me, you're a fan who is tired of fan outrage. I've barely read any of it. I've honestly not read a lot of social media this year. So if you're like me, you might be in a position of wanting to everything you wanted to know about the current controversy. You know, there is some controversy. There was a changed ending to season 2. But it's time to look back on it all. It's time to not do the hot takes that we did throughout season 1 and season 2, and not do the cold takes that we normally do when we go to a story randomly. But it's time for a lukewarm take. So it's time for porridge that is just right. And that's what we are bringing to you today, folks. Porridge that is just right. That's right. Keep it right here for porridge. But also keep it right here for a lot of news and information on the season, a lot of our opinions, a lot of our thoughts on what is and isn't Doctor Who, whether it belongs on Disney Plus at all, where its future might be. But yeah, to kick things off, because I've not really been on social media this year at all, in general.
What is wrong with you, first of all?
I know.
Oh, my God.
I know. And suddenly I've got all these hours in the day. It's very bizarre. I'm not even filling them up with watching Doctor Who.
Pretty great mental health, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, wow, the world suddenly seems a nicer place. But anyway, what this means is I've barely dipped into the Pull to Open Twitter account because I've just not been doing Twitter in general. So I haven't really kind of seen what's been said. I've barely looked at our comments on our YouTube videos. And so, Pete, I was hoping we'd just kick it off with, so what is this? What is the state of play with Doctor Who right now and the controversy over season 2? Could you define it for someone who, knows the show but maybe hasn't kept up with all the talk about it?
I love how you've subtly sort of said you're super busy and I'm somehow not.
Yeah. You know what? I'm too important for Doctor Who now, Pete. So if you could just summarize all the Doctor Who for me, that'd be great.
I can. Okay. So anyway, we're looking back at a lot of
this guy in blue box.
There is,
and he's gone through many faces.
Goes through time and space, anywhere and everywhere, every star that ever was. That's a good show, a good premise for one, anyway. No. Okay. So listen up. Lot of things to look back on. We're, as I promised at the outset, one of the things we do have to look back on a little bit at some point in this podcast is our review of the Reality War, which might be slightly out of step with what a lot of people thought of it. But anyway, the point is that Series 2 there's a consensus that's emerged that it isn't what necessarily was planned at the beginning, right? So there's a lot of stuff that happened behind the scenes, and we don't typically talk about behind the scenes stuff, right? Like, I mean, we do. I mean, but it isn't. There's other podcasts that are like right up to the second and talk about rumors and stuff, and we just kind of like, well, what has informed the story? What behind the scenes is really relevant here? And again, history is being written now in terms of what happened here with season 2, but a bunch of things apparently happened behind the scenes. And one is that, as we all saw, Ncuti Gatwa regenerated at the end of the reality war. And that wasn't actually planned to begin with. Now, again, I'm getting into some speculative stuff here. I should qualify all of this. We're not, I don't know anyone personally who is behind the scenes. I'm getting all this information secondhand from the internet. But I got to say, Doctor Who fans are pretty good at sleuthing. And they understand when there's an official story and perhaps something that is, the real story. You might say they might have signed the Official Secrets Act and know a thing or two about how things are done. But really, okay, so you can sort of read all these tea leaves, which are all public. So Ncuti Gatwa did come out and say this was the plan all along. But I think to a large extent he has to say that to make sure there's not so much controversy, and there's everything's ended on a good note. But he was saying as recently as I think last fall that he did intend to do a third series.
Right.
There is an interview where he said that. So at some point he was assuming that was what was going to happen. And this was around the same time that Russell T Davies was saying, hey, no one is going to decide anything until after season 2 is finished,
right?
Which was news to everybody back then, even though he kind of portrayed it as this was always the plan to do things. So something changed around there, and if it was always the plan to wait until season 2 was over before they decided anything, no one told the lead actor.
yes,
Which seems like a big thing you might want to do. So
well, I will say, just to give you a chance to take a drink of water. But I'll also say the one bit of sleuthing that I did see that has sort of wormed away at my fan brain for a while is that they did interviews with Carol Ann Ford wearing a different costume on the set of the TARDIS, but wearing a different costume than the one she's in now. And this was taken as definitive proof, which you got to think it is, right? That the original plan was that the season would end with Susan actually appearing in more than just a dream or just a vision in the Interstellar Song Contest, or little bits of here and there in Wish World and Reality War, that there was actually going to be an ending where she is definitively, her relationship to the Doctor is definitively explained, right?
Well, not just there was going to be, there was. This is where this all leads to, right? Which is that, they reshot the ending because Ncuti Gatwa was either, we don't know what happened, who decided what, but at some point some decision was made where Ncuti left the show and they had to reshoot the ending to accommodate his regeneration. Right. And all of that is fairly obvious from the reshoots and the footage at the end. And really, honestly, the story structure of the reality war. But there was an original version of the reality war. And not it just was, there is. It exists. There is a finished version of that episode somewhere where Susan is sort of at the end there where everybody's dancing. And it's supposed to pan up to her. Again, this is the exact scripting here is rumor, but it all makes sense looking at what we have seen in terms of what you just talked about and everything else. And there was a photo of an official photo of the ending that sort of leaked out on Disney Plus. And she would say, "Let's go, Mom," or "Come on, Mom," or something, talking to Poppy. Yes, exactly. It's so that's done. Maybe someday we'll see it. Maybe it'll be on a Blu-ray or whatever the hologram equivalent is 30 years from now,
right?
When it all comes out.
But the presumption is that so let me get this straight. So that ending was shot, but because
shot and finished, to my knowledge,
and finished.
I mean, who knows, right? But because they did the reshoots in February this year, so maybe there was some stuff they didn't finish, but they certainly had all the footage for it.
And the reshoots must have been pretty extensive, because the reshoots would have included the scenes that we see at the end of the reality war of like flashback to Belinda saying all these things about Poppy and the TARDIS, which are now true because we've shifted over to the other universe, right? So those would have been part of the reshoots.
I'm not sure exactly scene by scene what was part of the reshoots. I mean, the stuff in the TARDIS where Poppy disappears, I think that was probably in the main script. But what I'm talking about right at the end, like we see flashbacks to like Belinda and the Doctor after Lux, and Belinda saying something about, "Oh, you've really got to meet Poppy," or "You've really got to meet her dad," or something like that. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, they probably, I mean, that wouldn't have taken too much if it's all in the TARDIS and she just does some costume changes. I'm sure they still have the costumes. So all of that's fine. But you can honestly, like, now to not just rehash stuff that's been on other podcasts and other rumors. I think, this is clearly what Russell T. Davies was leading up to. Like if you think about even as far back as The Devil's Cord, when they first started teasing Susan, and then very tellingly in Empire of Death, or actually no, it was Legend of Ruby Sunday.
Legend of Ruby Sunday, yes.
There was the back and forth between Gatwa's doctor and Kate, and like, hey, having kids isn't the same thing. We actually talked about it at the time because I thought it was such a cop out because he'd already previously said he's a father, but Gatwa's doctor says like, well, I don't have kids yet. It doesn't work that way with Time Lords.
Life of a time traveler. Yes.
And so clearly this was all leading to this, right? Not necessarily it was all going to pay off in the reality war, but there was a plan to do more with the Doctor and his family and give some clarity there, whether, people asked for it or not, which would have been kind of interesting, right? Because if they'd gone into his third season and explored further, like who Susan is exactly, right?
Right.
Not just his granddaughter, but you could explore, well, is she also like a timeless child? Because the Doctor isn't actually a Time Lord, right? He's just this strange orphan from somewhere who seeded the Time Lords. So what does that make Susan? I imagine maybe that would have been answered, but I'm sure it would have come up.
Yes. So here's my question, and I don't know if the rumor mill has addressed this at all, but why could that not coexist with a Gatwa regeneration? Like, would it? It sort of feels like they thought this would distract from the regeneration, or you didn't have enough space for it. But you could still make it work. You could still have Susan do that, Well,
maybe. I imagine it was a matter of who was available for the reshoots and what did they want to do. I could also imagine if you're Russell T. Davies and, you now are forced to regenerate your Doctor that you weren't planning to regenerate, you probably just want to keep it simple. And you're going to leave things that you were seeding for the third series maybe in the hands of, well, I mean, again, we can talk about this in a bit, but like, is he even going to be the showrunner anymore? Like what's going on? Like, there's a lot of things you're juggling, and the main thing you want to do is just clear up like, okay, he's regenerating. There's a new Doctor, and not necessarily, throw a bunch of other stuff in there. But also like maybe Caroline Ford just couldn't do it to come in for the whatever
for a reshoot. But you wouldn't necessarily need to reshoot that. And also, I mean, I kind of like the we can second guess showrunners all day on Pull to Open, and we often do. But I will say that you couldn't like maybe it would be a distraction and everyone would be focused on it, but you could just have that same ending, and presumably like the Doctor and Belinda, I'm presuming in this the first shot ending were not there, and Susan just comes in and says, hi, Mom, our jaws dropped to the floor, but the Doctor and Belinda don't necessarily see it. Is that
I don't know
how it was supposed to go? Well, anyway, like I'm very curious about why they couldn't have coexisted. I will say that the ending on Billie Piper, I think, like, go back, I will, I don't think it's bad that our reality war review is out of step with, quote unquote consensus, which what does that even mean? But
no, I don't feel bad about it either.
But I will say, I will revise my opinion on Billie Piper, because the one thing I didn't realize at the time was that it was going to be obvious that she's not the Doctor because they're not doing the Billie Piper as the Doctor cover of Doctor Who magazine. They're not announcing her as the 16th Doctor. Like, it is very clear that she's not. She is some diversion from.
Well, she is on the cover of Doctor Who magazine. It's just she is the Doctor ?
Right, but yes, question mark, which is key. They
Billie
wouldn't
Piper
do
is
that.
the Doctor.
Which is just that's the problem to me. It's like the initial thing of like, oh my god, Rose is back, but how? Was tempered by this sense of, and maybe this is probably being too much of a Doctor Who fan, because you know that if they're actual doctors, they get the magazine cover treatment, they get the BBC press release, like it becomes official that she's number 16. And the very fact that she isn't reveals the mystery, right?
I suppose. I mean, again, we don't know one way or the other. So to be clear, no, I don't feel bad at all that our review is allowed to step with consensus. What I do want to clarify is a couple things on that. And I'll get to Billie Piper in a second, which is that I think the reality war works on the rules that the Wish World establishes. So in other words, as a payoff to that episode, which was already kind of nuts, there was it works, and I think a lot of the things that people don't like about it, and I'll agree that I kind of don't like on a certain level, are more like fan things, like Omega, for example. Oh, Omega has a lot of potential, but they wasted it. Well, if you don't know Omega and you don't care, like who cares, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and so there's that. But I will also say, like, I tend to agree with some of a good chunk of the fan consensus when looking back at the whole era. And I think that's what sort of has come out on the reality war. So on its own, I think reality war Wish World is fine. But as a sort of emblem of this era and perhaps some of the excesses of it, it's definitely an example of that. Now, Billie Piper. Okay. Lots to say about this, but I think it's encapsulated in my son's first words after we had watched this together and the credits rolled. He basically said, "Ref, do something." Like, that was his review, and I can't disagree. Like, it's just, what are you doing? And I like. It is not a thing I think most people saw and said, like, oh, awesome. I think this is a grown moment. It's one of these things that, like, it's basically the most arguably self-indulgent movie could have made. And in a era that is marked by a lot of callbacks that I don't think were necessary or really added to a lot to this era, I thought it was a really unfortunate way to end it. Also because there's an ambiguity now to where Doctor Who's going to go or even who's going to run it. It gives this sort of loose end. It gives it to the next person. And I think that's just kind of it's kind of like when a series ends on a cliffhanger and it gets canceled, right? And who knows, Doctor Who might be canceled. Like, it might be done for a while. Like, yes, I agree.
For a while.
I agree.
Let's be clear here. I'm not going to go off on many rants here, but I will go off on a rant on this. Doctor Who is not going to die. Like, the BBC will never cancel Doctor Who again. It was infamous the way that it happened. Okay, I'm knocking on wood as I say that, okay? But I believe the BBC will not cancel it again. Or if they do, it will be like, 5 years before someone comes in of, the new director general of the BBC is like, you know what I loved as a kid? I loved watching David Tennant when I was a kid. Let's bring back Doctor Who, right?
Don't get me wrong. I don't in no way believe that Doctor Who, it's just too valuable as a franchise and a property that the BBC would simply let it die. That said, it may be in for a relatively long rest. I'm not talking about a wilderness year's rest where it's gone for like whatever it was, 15 years, but it could be a while.
Could be 5 years.
I would give it, like, I don't know. Again, my knowledge of inside information is nothing compared to people out there. But my general sense is that it's probably like a toss-up whether Russell T Davies is the showrunner when it comes back.
True.
So like, it sort of saddles the next person with this thing that they're going to have to deal with one way or the other. Now, maybe it is Russell T Davies, and maybe he comes back in it. Maybe we look very foolish. We're actually recording this a few weeks before we're going to post it, so maybe we'll look like idiots because he'll be announced in that interim, and it'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, like he's back, and it's back, and everything's good. But somehow I don't think so, and. Yeah, it's just I just even if it was coming back and it was already renewed, I just think the Billie Piper thing is like I'm done with looking back, and I'm so ready to expand on this. There was so much of the whole era, the whole Gatwa era, that even though I believe at the outset they were sort of someone said somewhere that this was going to be Doctor Who year one, and we're going to reboot and just start telling stories. They so did not. There was all this stuff that went back into the lore and callbacks and new and old. Well,
before we get too far on that, I just want to throw in one comment that's actually similar to the one you got from Jack about the Billie Piper reveal. My friend Seth, he's kind of a casual Doctor Who fan, and he's kind of my personal barometer of like the wider world of like the maximum possible expansion of Doctor Who fandom is like all the people who are with it for Tennant and Matt Smith, but then maybe kind of dropped off after that, right? That like he's a barometer of that, and his response to seeing Billie Piper pop up that day was, is there no one RTD won't bring back?
Well, my daughter had a similar comment where she was just like, aren't there other actors in Britain?
Right. And this is the problem is the end of the reality war would have worked beautifully if Power of the Doctor had never happened. Like you're basically trying to reference.
Go on.
Well, you're kind of doing the same thing, right? You're referencing the glory years. You're referencing the Tennant era. You're referencing your own glory years. I don't know if self-indulgent is the right word for that. I don't think it's self-indulgent. I think writers are just, either self-indulgent all the time or not self-indulgent at all. But that's sort of the nature of being.
Well, yeah, you're right. It's the wrong word. But what I would say it is
self-referential.
I mean, what I'm trying to get at, it's trying to create a moment, not a story. And I do feel like that is another aspect of this era where it was really more about viral moments and getting the fans talking rather than actually telling good stories and really exploring the things they were revealing, right? Like you think about a character like the Ronnie, like, I mean, they just sort of brought her back and there was a little bit of missiness and a little bit of references here, but there just wasn't enough there, and maybe part of that is they just didn't have enough stuff. But I do feel like there was more about made a bit about just sort of creating moments than creating stories.
Well, okay. Stories. First of all, I think one thing we also know as Doctor Who fans is it takes a while for a season to sink in before we're like, oh, that was a good story. Oh, that was a bad story, right? Season 1. Let's go back to season 1 because we are talking about the whole of Gatwa.
Sure.
I don't think that I have shown any Doctor Who recently, like going back for years, more than I have shown people 73 yards. Yes, thumbs up for 73 yards. Dot and Bubble. That was my bubble. And Rogue. Like those are three standalone stories that I show people who are like curious about what is Doctor Who these days. And in my experience, like I've converted people with that. Some people have been like, whoa, I didn't know Doctor Who could be like that. They are, to my mind, off the charts bangers, and we'll find out when we get to our super cold take whenever the randomizer takes us there. But like, that's a pretty good average for one season, right?
Well,
now,
yeah, I mean, I agree with you on 73 yards and Dot and Bubble. I would say Lux would be another one that I would say. So there's been some really good Doctor Who. I mean, yes, there's Dot and Bubble, 73 yards, The Well, and Lux. Those are probably my top 4.
You wouldn't put Rogue in there?
Rogue, it's kind of in the top half, but I think there's some weak stuff with the villains, and it just kind of doesn't quite work for me.
Okay, well, I love the meta aspect, the cosplay aspect of it. It's very, very meta about fandom and Bridgerton and all that stuff. But anyway, go on.
Well, I was just saying that I think having a few epic things as one-offs. I mean, yeah. I mean, the thing is, I will give RTD credit. Like I'm not here to just like say he's a bad showrunner. I mean, the thing is, remember when he was first announced, like I had a great deal of enthusiasm for him coming back. And I thought, okay, great. It was thanks to him really that primarily that Doctor Who became the international phenomenon it turned out to be in New Who. So like all of fandom owes him a great deal of gratitude. And so, yes, he can do things like break canon. He tries risky things, and can create something great. But all that said, like he clearly has his preferences, his proclivities, his politics. He does, and he has less inhibition. Like all creators who sort of get into this, I think, era of their careers, maybe not all, but like some of these sort of, popular ones, like, you think of Lucas and you think of Spielberg and those who sort of like go further out, and the coming back of their work, like going, it gets
going
worse.
back to their work. Yeah. No, because fewer people are saying no. That's generally the truth. But I will say this about Russell T Davies: you really have to look at the totality of Russell T Davies, and if anyone out there is criticizing Russell T Davies being too political in this season, for being too edgy, pushing the envelope on this or that, go back and watch Queer as Folk, people. Like, this is a showrunner who, from the very start of his career, and Queer and Folk as Folk is what really made RTD's career. Sure. It is controversial as hell. It was like discussed in Parliament. It was, just the images of like, gay relationships on the screen. It was such a big deal. And he did not hold back on any of the details in that, right? This is a man who knows how to court controversy and knows that, he has a viewpoint and wants to place it. And I think he summed up his viewpoint elegantly, because he's often hit with the woke question. And his response to that was, from his point of view, he's displaying the totality of the world. He's displaying the totality of the world and everyone in it, including a lot of subgroups that are not often represented on television. For example, the, differently abled, who we saw a lot of in Wish World and Reality War, right? And that's his perspective. And he thinks that, the people who criticize him for quote unquote woke are more they're like the MP3s to the, the lossless compression of the real world, as it were, because they're just looking at a narrow band of the world and saying, why isn't this represented anymore? Right. So, it's a legit thing. And I go through this a lot on the Star Wars front, right? I didn't like the prequels. But the more that I reported on Star Wars, I decided I didn't like the fan reaction to the prequels much more. Like, the prequels actually have a fair amount to recommend them if you go and talk to people who like them. Especially now, they sort of look politically much more interesting than they did. But like the whole reaction, the whole insane off-the-charts reaction of like people recording songs, going, George Lucas raped my childhood, all of that stuff, it was insane, and it was childish, and it was off the charts. And we sort of saw it again with Game of Thrones, right? With the people who had problem with it the last season, especially the last episode of Game of Thrones, and were putting out petitions to get it reshot. I'm like, do you know how hard this stuff is to make in the first place? Like the amount of stuff has to go together, and they try to do it with The Last Jedi as well, right? It's the reaction of modern fandom scares me. I will just state
I agree.
it
There's toxic fans. I mean, in any franchise. But what I think there's a danger of, though, is to flatten the criticism and say like, oh, you're criticizing how RTD is doing politics, therefore you're a toxic fan and I'm going to completely ignore you. And I think that's unfair. I think it's fair to criticize the way he's doing politics without necessarily even taking issue with the content. Right. I think there are ways to do politics in Doctor Who, and it's silly to say that Doctor Who should be apolitical. No one should be saying, it never has been. What are you talking about? But the way it's been done in the last couple of years, where characters like are literally speaking the lessons, I would argue is not good storytelling. I mean, you know, it started from the very start of like the specials with Tennant, And the Star Beast, it's all over that one. And it goes all the way to the giggle and the sort of wheelchair access thing. And again, no one's against wheelchair access. It's just like, come on, like it's just like, you're just telling me the lesson here, and almost daring me to not like it. I would say, even if you align with the politics, like it just doesn't give you much to chew on in a lot of cases. I mean, you think about the robot revolution, for example. And supposedly the Allen guy is some incel where, I mean, he's not really, because he has a girlfriend, but anyway. And it's literally, Belinda even speaks it of like, this is Planet of the Incel. It's like, okay, is it all text? Is there any subtext we can go in here? What I would say is that good political storytelling would inspire debate and discussion and different interpretations, even with the messaging. And this generally wasn't it. It was more in your face. It was more just almost angry in some ways. Like, we're seeing the world as good guys and bad guys, and the bad guys are the worst possible, and we're not even going to sort of examine the underlying issue. We're just going to portray them in the worst possible way, so there's nothing to even examine. Case in point, Conrad.
Well, I was going to bring up Conrad too, because we do get different aspects of Conrad. You just have to wait.
I don't think you get different aspects of Conrad in the sense that he's shown some kindness, but I think he gets more caricatured over time, because by the time we get to Wish World, he's apparently a bigot against trans people and wants traditional marriage or whatever because of his 1960s vision, which none of that was even really hinted at in Lucky Day. It's just, he's a conspiracy theorist, therefore he must align with all this version of politics that we're arguing against. And I just don't think
the Wish World or Reality War that he's a bigot. No point. No. They just say that there are certain people out there who just aren't in his conception of the world, which is fair. Like, we all exist in bubbles. We all exist in our privilege.
I think they're splitting the hair pretty thin there.
But the point is, he's a sympathetic character in Wish World and Reality War, especially Reality War. And one thing he tells us is he did what the Doctor said. Like, he was actually changed by his meeting with the Doctor. He was trying to create a world that was along the lines of what the Doctor was talking about. So I was actually pleasantly surprised by how much not two-dimensional Conrad was at the end of the day. Like, yes, we had to wait beyond Lucky Day for it, and I agree. The version of Conrad in Lucky Day could have been a bit more three-dimensional, but again, like, it was supposed to flip in our understanding of him. So is there even enough room for that? I don't know, but I will say, like, let's not do Conrad dirty here. He comes out of it looking as like a pretty decent guy at the end of the day, and we know he's a dishwasher, but we also know that, like, he didn't come from a good home. And we saw that right at the start of Lucky Day. He made a point of pointing out the fact that he's hit. His parent hits him, and that was, even in whenever that's supposed to be, 2007, was not like the most common thing in the UK. We'd moved beyond that, punishing a child. So that was definitely an indication. And then there's something about, like, his father wasn't around, and so we learn more about Conrad. He becomes a sympathetic figure, and it's left on that nice note of he's having a happy life now. In his other life.
Well, I mean, I think actually maybe a nice note, but maybe
he was sucked into the systemic toxicness of the internet, which is, I think, what Lucky Day is really about. Systemic toxicness of the internet, which is actually true. I mean, no one who's looked at a Twitter thread or a YouTube comment section can say that the internet doesn't drive you, with its sort of level of anonymity, drive you into much more kind of aggressive behavior and sort of perhaps a more extreme viewpoint, and an algorithmically extreme viewpoint, right? Because algorithms do push us into seeing more extreme content, because that's what keeps us on YouTube.
Yeah, that's true. I think Lucky Day, I must say, I enjoyed it a lot more on second watch.
Mm-hmm.
And when the internet stuff came up, I wish they had explored that a little more. They certainly went straight to he's off his rocker and he's storming the unit headquarters, and then all that just got a little silly. But the worst thing I think was that you never quite figure out where he stands in that episode, because it's like he's clearly believes or understands that all this stuff happening is real, but he doesn't really show it, or rather, I don't know. I can't even express it now because I don't get it. Right?
Well, I totally got it. I totally got it, and I can totally explain it. And it is totally, again, the online problem of you can create your own reality, which is sort of, I think that's why that's a nice counterpoint to Wishful. You can believe what you want to believe, and you can believe two things at once.
I can never arrive at a point where I could believe the characters. The point, I get it. This is what this guy is and what he's trying to do. It just, none of it really made sense under any scrutiny, under any dimension. No way he believes this or doesn't do that. Or he thinks it's all real, but he's just grandstanding. And it's like, well, why would you do that? And why would you then storm unit headquarters to prove something is already real or not real? Or it breaks down however you look at it.
I totally read that as real, as believable, as a perfect and very timely look at what the extremism that the internet pushes you towards, that the algorithmic extremism that comes out of the internet can have people doing and saying really dumb things, and practicing doublethink, which is, a thing George Orwell termed in 1948. It's been with us for a long time. This concept of doublethink, of knowing one thing to be true. In Conrad's case, he kind of knows that aliens are, but also that doesn't fit into our worldview, right? And I think that's a nice exploration of the fact that if the TARDIS did appear in our backyard and, aliens were crawling all over everywhere and they're leaving unrealistic green goo, as apparently aliens have been doing in Doctor Who for a while, you would have a hard time fitting that into your conception of the world. And maybe you would be sort of starting to lean towards the side of the internet that is being all think tank, yay, doctor, boo.
I feel like it's a concept that would have worked better in Classic Who with everything reversed. Because now that the aliens are public and UNIT is a real organization fighting aliens, to flip that as the conspiracy is there are no aliens already just seems a little weird. And I get that, maybe this is Inception on almost like reverse Inception. But I think in the Classic Who, it would have been kind of cool to have someone be like an alien believer or that wants to expose UNIT because there really are aliens. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And then a UNIT has to work at deceiving people, which would have been kind of because that's what they have been doing up until recently, apparently. Anyway, let's leave Conrad for a minute. Yes. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the companions. So Belinda from this past season and Ruby from both seasons, but mostly season 1. And there is another behind the scenes thing that we haven't really talked about, which is that and probably less supported, because it's not like there's a whole finished version of season 2 with Ruby, but it does seem like the original plan was to have Ruby go 2 seasons, and for whatever reason Millie Gibson couldn't do it. So Belinda was written in, and with Ruby still taking some of her character's role in the arc plot in season 2. And I'm sure some stories were reworked around this, but it does seem pretty clear that Ruby was supposed to be a through line because of her, I think, from her role in Reality War, where in my view, she's the best character who comes out of that. And she has so many of the best scenes and great lines and is crucial to that story. Whereas Belinda, they literally put her in a box for the last bit of the episode while everyone else gets to go save the world. She goes in the zero room. So, and I think, not to, I think, by the way, Varada Sethu has had some great moments and great costumes. And I think the start of the season was quite strong for her. But over time, and there wasn't that much time, there was 8 episodes, but she didn't really have a lot of great material as time went on. You think about Story in the Engine, and she's barely in half of it. And when she is in it, she's kind of just helping out with the Doctor, and even Interstellar Song Contest, she's just kind of in the background, not really making decisions. And I feel like that was a repeated theme, that she had a lot of potential. People liked her, but the scripts as the season went on didn't really show that potential. And I feel like there is, again, it wasn't written or produced or made, but I mean, there's probably a version of season 2 where that was Ruby, and we would probably been a little more forgiving of it because she was so developed in season 1.
Yes, they did Belinda dirty. I'll absolutely agree with you on that. I feel like my comments at the start of when we did our Robot Revolution hot take, and indeed my review of it for Mashable, absolutely stand that there was a problem with Belinda, that it having enough agency for us to care about her in this story. And I remember my frustration in Interstellar Song Contest when she tells us about the tasty chef on Hinge, which is like, that is one little detail that would have it would have changed the Robot Revolution in so many ways. Like, maybe it wouldn't have saved the whole thing. I still think it's a pretty meh story, but like, it would. My problem throughout that was I have many reasons to care about Verada Setu. I think she's awesome. I have no reasons to care about Belinda. And in fact, so many reasons not to, right? She doesn't speak up at all of these moments. She doesn't embrace her queendom in any way. Like, there's no development with her. There's no real development. And honestly, I think it's probably quite telling that the thing that I will probably remember Belinda for the most from this season is the scene where, do you remember where I think it's in Lux, he's introducing the Vindicator. He's like, this is a vortex indicator. Cut to Verada Seto going, huh? Which I will call a vindicator. Cut to her going, It reminded me so much of the meme of, like, the woman who tastes the thing and it's like, oh, it's yucky, but ooh, the aftertaste. Like, I think about that a lot. Like, that's the thing about Belinda that I think about the most looking back on season 2, which is not the greatest sign of a great character. I love that moment, but not the greatest character.
True. Yeah, I actually never think about that scene. So it's funny that it's.
Because I'm totally online, or was totally online, and think about like that reaction gifs a lot. I was like, oh, that was a reaction gif.
Well, the scene I think a lot with Belinda is as she very quickly gets into being with the Doctor, is like the costume changing scenes. I feel like, and I do feel like there's missed potential for her to have been a little more at odds with him, a little more tension. Like, Ncuti Gatwa was such an emotive, happy, he's a very affable guy. You like him, right? Even though I didn't like him in Robot Revolution, and I stand by that. I think he's not very cool, and I think that was very good to have Belinda's character be skeptical and not like him, because I think he was a little too over the top in his stuff, and he was a little too into sort of manipulating her almost, which I that's what I got across, which I hopefully it was intentional. But I think they should have played more of that tension early, because it seems like right off the bat, she's in the yellow dress and she's liking it. And similarly, even in The Well, where she, like, I think one of the best, like, this is, she almost looks dreamy in her yellow dress there at the beginning, where she's like, do we get to change our clothes? And she smiles at him, and she's like, oh, you're beginning to enjoy this, which is a fun scene. But it's also like, at that point, you honestly feel like, well, why isn't she let's just be companions. I'll just travel with you. This is awesome. Whereas I think it would have been better structurally for the season if there was more tension. And then they missed the biggest opportunity, in my view, in Interstellar Song Contest, where they make Gatwa's Doctor go dark and he's torturing Kid, which I didn't buy, by the way. Like, I think, for the story, it's like, okay, I guess, but it just felt wrong in so many ways. And we kind of talked about it at the time, not just wrong, obviously wrong morally, but it's like, it was wrong in that, like, what are you even doing? This just seems really out of character for the Doctor, even with the scale of the thing. And I know they tried to explain it, but even if you buy into that, there was a good opportunity for her to be scared and resentful, as opposed to scared and then give him a big hug at the end. Right. Then it's like everything. It's just a big reset. She could have been much more like, I don't want to do this anymore. You were off the handle. And they didn't, because they wanted to keep that sort of friendly, affable atmosphere, which I get. But it's like, you're sacrificing, I think, something that could have been a little more edgy for something a little more safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll agree with you on that. And yeah, Ruby, no question who the best companion is of the Gatwa era that we must now look back on. It's definitely Ruby.
Yeah, not necessarily the best performer. Although I think so. Like, I mean, I love Billie Gibson. I thought she was a breakout star, but I think Verada Sethu was great. It's just she wasn't given great material.
Right. Millie Gibson definitely got better material. Season 1, I think in general, probably will come to be seen as better material. Although season 2 had a lot of highlights. I mean, let's definitely get into the say something nice area of the podcast now. I feel like we're straying too far from it. But I really I still love Lux. My opinion on that has not changed.
It stands up
since I saw it. I think the Well, really not my scene, but still, not my kind of Doctor Who, much more your kind of Doctor Who. But still enjoyed it,
Oh, I love The Well. It's probably my favorite of season 2. I know some people thought the midnight thing was unnecessary, and maybe it is. I'll just say I was not spoiled, and I really love that moment when it was like, oh, it's the midnight entity, and you're sort of drawing that connection. In other words, it's kind of like one of those moments as a fan, you're excited to fill in your headcanon, even though the monster's sort of doing different things. But you sort of have this, I forget how many years it was between the two. It's like thousands or millions of years. And you think about like, what was it up to? What happened when it stripped mind? And you think about the creature laughing. They talk about that when they created the Well, etc. So all of that, I got really... It heightened my
tissue needed.
Yeah, it heightened my appreciation. And I think Doctor Who when it does this, it does it wisely. And so I'll actually even connect it to something we've done relatively recently, which was the Horror of Fang Rock, where they made the creature a rewritten, where you didn't have to, right? You didn't have to make it something that was connected to something from before. But because they did that, it makes you sit up and pay attention as a Doctor Who fan. And I think it was one of those times, one of the callbacks that really worked. And I'm critical of the callbacks. I think there were too many. I think generally the overall reliance on them in this era was a mistake. But that one in specifically, I really liked. I really appreciated. Let's keep saying things nice. Ncuti Gatwa, great. Really interesting, brand new take on the Doctor. Comfortable with expressing his feelings. Apparently the post-therapy Doctor, but he really just wants to make connections with people around him. He's very expressive. In a lot of ways, it's almost like the opposite of Peter Capaldi. And nothing, obviously Peter Capaldi, amazing, one of the best of all time. But
the opposite approach to playing the Doctor.
Yeah, exactly. Where he, remember he started out in series 8, and he was very distant and even more alien than we've seen the Doctor in a long time, and probably harken back to Colin Baker in some ways. And this was definitely kind of the opposite. Now, does that is one better than the other for Doctor Who? You probably could argue like Capaldi's is more traditional, but like I say, it's a 60-plus-year-old show. Let's try something new. Let's try this approach. We tried it for 2 seasons. I thought big chunks of it worked. I think there was every chance of winning over a new audience with that approach. I think, again, I think the stories around that probably could have been better, more thoughtful, but Gatwa, don't really have a lot of complaints there.
Absolutely. I mean, Doctor Who was lucky to have him for as long as it could hold on to him, and I'm sure, I don't think anyone would fault him for wanting to move on if the show's in limbo, right? If the question of season 3's in limbo. Guy's becoming a big movie star. He was in Barbie. He's about to be in The Roses. I mean, his career has taken off, and as is Verada Sethu's, perhaps a little more slowly, but still, like, she's doing a lot of stuff, and fine career ahead of her. I would say that probably the same Millie Gibson. I think we'll be looking back at this period of Doctor Who and seeing ways in which it captured lightning in a bottle, certainly in its casting, at least. Now, I gotta
say, to sort of talk a little bit about Gatwa's performance and where I really liked him most. I think is where he got more controlled, because it's always very easy, I think, for him to come into a scene and be larger than life. And he did this often when he came back to Unit and he was hugging everybody. So you could have too much of that. But I really liked it in episodes like The Well, which again, I like for a lot of reasons. But one of the things he does in that one, he establishes his authority almost through empathy. Like he comes in and he's sympathetic to I forget the victim, but it's because of that everyone starts looking to him, I think. Not just that, but it's subtler than just going, everyone's babes and everyone's whatever, like I like that. And so he's very capable of doing that quiet emotive authority. There's one moment actually in the Reality War where I really like, even though I don't love the pantheon of the gods, and we can talk about that, but he does have this line at the end where he goes like, the gods play tricks, but I beat them. And his sort of delivery of that line I thought was really great. He was very much the Doctor in that moment.
He has some amazing choices on how to deliver his lines throughout. I mean, right from what I still consider the best moment of Space Babies, which is a hard thing to find. But no, that whole moment of like where he's talking about the genocide of Gallifrey, and he goes from "Go on," which is his sort of outburst, his wail of genocide of the Time Lords, to "Gone, they're gone, babes." They're all gone. Like he goes from up there to down there in the same line. And it's extraordinary. And, I think we're going to be looking back on his portrayal as the Doctor positively. But yeah, if we step outside of the say something nice segment for a second, I think you're right to, the pantheon, the fact that the Pantheon of Gods thing was not paid off was irksome. Like we didn't really get that. Like it was just sort of there's a pantheon out there, and we're going to see some members of it occasionally. And was the Rani really part of that? Are you shoehorning the Rani into that? Are you shoehorning? Well, you could shoehorn Omega into that, but then you've got to spend more time on Omega. It just sort of felt a bit all over the place. Like he wasn't, RTD needed to commit to the bit when it came to the Pantheon.
Yeah, I mean, it was an excuse to have no rules, and then there were no rules to having no rules. That was my view. And seriously, like, because in the last story, they just made up this extra god who's a baby, who's the god of wishing. So in other words, you can basically make up any god you want, whenever you want, pull them in to do some totally unreal thing that's utterly unscientific. Seriously, the Pantheon of the Gods, surprise, surprise, I didn't love the whole concept. And I honestly think if Terrence Dix were alive, he would be rolling in his grave. Like he would not have loved it. Certainly Chris Bidmead would have hated it. Like and again, this is taste, right? Like I get it. There's things like Lord of the Rings, there's whatever magic thing, Harry Potter.
Yeah, American Gods was a great example of what you can do. And it felt like the story and the engine got really close to American Gods territory.
Maybe it's just Doctor Who is going after a different audience, but as someone who grew up on the classic series, like I always think back to a line from the Damons from the John Pertwee era, where Joe is asking Doctor about the occult, because that's what the episode's about. And the Doctor very much insists, everything that happens in life must have a scientific explanation if you know where to look for it, that is. And that to me has always been at the core of Doctor Who, that gods and magic are simply technology or things you can't explain yet, but there is an explanation. It's not magic. And now bringing in the gods and this pantheon of gods, and I think there's even more than like the Doctor talked about in the story in the engine that he knows the gods and has drink wine with them and did all these other crap with them, which I also didn't like. Like there's this whole layer of gods, like, which is like, okay, I guess, but if that's going to be compatible with Doctor Who, like where have they been? Like there have been a lot of universe destroying things from the Flux to Logopolis.
Well, it was
the
never
Time
quite
War, the Dalek. Like what have you been doing?
There's an easy answer to that, which is that the 14th Doctor let them in Wild Blue Yonder.
Right. Yes.
But
and
he didn't quite stick to that. Didn't quite commit to that bit, and that is the problem. doing Pantheon of the Gods, commit to the bit. It felt like it was building to something. It didn't. And that's a problem. That is a problem looking back on the season. It's like I have no problem with Doctor Who like including gods or having a goddish season or like going off in that more direction for a little bit, and then new showrunner comes along and it's like, the exquisite corpse. You fold a piece of paper over and you draw the next bit or you write the next bit. And Doctor Who's always been like that. And Doctor Who's never what Terrance Dicks wanted it to be. And by the way, you can find 100 examples in the Terrance Dicks era of exactly, that something that contradicts the demons, right? I'm just thinking of the spiders appearing in Planet of the Spiders, but by Buddhist chants they get summoned. Like, what's the science there?
Well, no. I'm not. No one is saying that it's like all like the science is exact. I mean, come on. Right. It's just more that like there isn't some sort of made up thing that that's essentially like, I guess the wish world would have been a great culmination of this, because it's just wishing, it's just bringing things, and it would have been good to sort of put a pin on it or end it after that episode, because it was just so to the extreme. But yeah, I hear you in the sense that Doctor Who reboots and it is different flavor and they do different things,
and that it had the Wild Blue Yonder thing right there.
Yeah.
It had this concept that they kept repeating, that the Doctor made this mistake in his 14th incarnation.
Open the door on it, which implies you can close the door on it whenever you want. Right. And that's kind of what we were waiting for. It's like, okay, you tried this thing for a couple seasons. It was kind of okay and kind of not. Let's just close the door on it at some point.
Yeah, or at least not even close the door on it, but build it to something, build it to a climax, like and let's loop back around to maybe the Doctor at the end goes, maybe the final episode should have been set on that spaceship, and they send the gods back from where they came to that other universe. I like that idea. I can totally roll with it. I can totally roll with gods and Doctor Who.
So what I think part of this led to, and this is all just it kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier, where RTD in this era was less inhibited. And I think he used the gods and this sort of almost magic background as almost his permission to be silly a lot of the time. And again, no one was telling him no. And you had things like space babies, like right off the, which is a very dubious choice, shall we say, as a season opener for season one. But everything like the robot revolution, and I commented at the time, it had the big robots, and it's just kind of goofy, like it just it's a very unreal layer to it. Now, if you look back, again, I don't think this is unique to RTD 2.0. I think this is very much an RTD 1.0 in a lot of places, and to some extent helped establish new Doctor Who. But I think in RTD 1.0, like it quickly settled into a nice equilibrium with whatever passes for realism in Doctor. Like basically, you had writers like Moffat and Robert Shearman and Dalek sort of bringing it back to a more serious pattern. But if you look back at Rose, for example, like you had the man-eating plastic bin, you had sort of silly concepts like anti-plastic. Mickey the Auton, his whole performance is nuts. So it was all kind of there from the beginning, but I feel like in the first era, it sort of settled into something that had a better through line of just didn't go all the way as often. This time it was all the way a lot. Like whether it was Interstellar Song Contest or the Church on Ruby Road with the goblins, like it was all just like I found it harder to take this era seriously.
Well, my friend, I think we have a strong disagreement on RTD 1.0 because what I saw in RTD 1.0 was a showrunner who was, he started out with the Rob Shearmans and the Moffats and, a lot of talented writers helping him along the way. But I really think that, and I think we both disagree about Journey's End, maybe we disagree about End of Time. I have not rolled my eyes harder at New Who than I did at the end of RTD 1.0. Pretty much everything from Voyage of the Damned on, and I've said it in the show before. My theory about this can be explained by the writer's tale, by the fact that RTD was kind of doing this as a performance right? With Benjamin Cook as his invisible audience, he was writing Doctor Who as a performance, and there was less of a second guessing himself that I think.
I'm sure you didn't roll your eyes at The Waters of Mars.
I kind of like we talked about this at the time. I did not have as great a time as Waters of Mars as you guys did. Do you remember? Go back to that podcast. Listen,
I remember you not giving it a banger. Yes,
that's right. Our friends from the Cloister Bell podcast did. You did, and I did not. I seriously I didn't. I've appreciated it more now. I understand the whole Time Lord Victorious thing. Honestly, at the time, that washed over me. I didn't really just didn't jibe with that last season and a half of RTD. Really just didn't do it for me. So I honestly there are more in the Gatwa era. There are more than in those last two seasons of RTD 1.0 that I would re-show. And I honestly think 73 yards, I'll say it again, I think it's going to be a modern classic. It's going to be one of the first things that people point to in RTD's tenure of either.
Okay.
It's
you're basically giving the whole Dr. Donna era a little short shrift there. The library is pretty darn good.
Okay, yeah. I will definitely make an exception for the Moffat written episodes there. Silence of the Library, Forest of the Dead. But go back and listen to our podcast.
All right. Well, we're not talking about series 4. Interesting. I definitely felt there was a different flavor to this. There was more sugar, way more sugar than there was the first time around. Maybe it's because I don't know. There wasn't as much. I guess with Ruby there was domestic stuff, but not in the same way that they did with Rose and her family, which just felt more real to me. I will say one thing, a note that I really don't like about that was that I feel like they really didn't do well by Carla Sunday, who has probably no less than 3 episodes where she's betraying Ruby or selling her out to the authorities or whatever. If you think about the church on Ruby Road, where there's the alternate timeline, there's 73 yards. And then there's Wish World. There's probably one I'm forgetting. It was very not okay that
it is. It is leaning. It's leaning a bit too much on the fact that is chilling because she's such a warm, bubbly, friendly, maternal personality, and it is chilling to see the opposite. And she does that so well to flip to the opposite of that. You're right. He did lean on that a bit too much, but. Writers do that. Yeah, but I think your point about sugar makes me think that the one thing I want to bring in here is this question of does Doctor Who belong on Disney Plus? Was that a good idea in retrospect? Obviously, it was an experiment worth trying. We don't know if it'll continue yet. Again, we could look like fools. Maybe they're going to announce a renewal deal in the next week or so. I doubt it. But I will say one thing that makes me think that Disney Plus is not the right home is the fact that even just the UI of Doctor Who on the Disney Plus app, right? You're probably as annoyed as I am by the fact that you've got Special 1, Special 2, Special, and they're all their own shows, right? It's not someone who doesn't understand Doctor Who designed the Doctor Who in the Disney UI, right? And it just gave the sense that Disney doesn't know what to do with Doctor Who. They may never have done. It's not quite. It's not a property they control. It's done with the BBC. They didn't quite feel like they were ever fully committing to it, except for providing gobs of cash. And that may have not been the right. It may have been a bit too over the top of what Doctor Who essentially is, which is British tea time viewing science fiction, right? That's what it is. It was always British, always had a small budget, slightly less small in the New Who era, but it was writing for that general audience, and it was it had to stretch itself intellectually because of the small budget. You had to come up with, different interesting ways to present stories. So maybe the Disney money was a bad deal overall because it didn't push the writers and the showrunner enough to think of stuff that you could achieve on a small budget, right?
Yeah, I agree, and I think there were a lot of over the top scenes that were unnecessary. Certainly in the reality war, where their unit is, and again, at the time, it was kind of delightfully nuts with the building turning and all the laser cannons. But it is just big dumb special effects, which were unnecessary. And there were more than a few things. There were places where they spent the money well, like Lux. Clearly, that was very well done.
Definitely.
And very expensive.
And I would say Interstellar Song Contest as well, the scene of everyone dying.
Yeah, there was some good stuff. But I think regardless of the streaming service that it's on, I don't care so much where it is. I would definitely agree, like, one, they have to like decide who they're marketing this to. Are you going for longtime fans? Are you going for growth and new fans? And it looked like Disney didn't quite know which way it was going. Like, it didn't have the back catalog, number one. And so that was a problem. So if you're a fan or a new fan that really wants to explore it, you've got to hunt it down on Max and BritBox or wherever else
Right.
to really check it out, which is unfortunate because I'm sure lots of people who saw Empire of Death really wanted to check out Pyramids of Mars right away.
Right, and they could do on iPlayer, but yeah, in the US, Doctor Who fans have definitely been given short shrift in the Disney era. I remember we were talking before any of the Disney specials happened about this question: are they gonna be the new home for Doctor Who? Right, all in one place. Like, I would get behind Disney as being Doctor Who's official streamer if they did that. If they worked out some deal with BritBox, they got deep enough pockets. They worked out with some deal with Max. Like, just bring it all together in one place.
Well, contracts last a while. I mean, it's hard. Like, you couldn't really revoke them. That's one of the reasons it's still on Max. And but I think the biggest problem with the Disney deal is just the money itself. It's I have no inside information, but it seems to me that was a big factor in this. We have to wait until season 2 is over before we make decisions, because if there's any chance Disney is going to renew it, they're going to wait. Because that's a lot of money. Because ultimately, the BBC controls Doctor Who. They have the rights to it. They're only, doing this thing in a partnership with Disney Plus or whoever else. So because that money is there, that's forcing them to make these decisions, which looks like it probably led to Gatwa leaving the show. Because again, last fall, he was filming a 3rd series this year. And he probably would be if there wasn't that. We have to wait for this thing to happen. So I completely agree. I think it would be better for the show overall if, you need to have a streaming strategy and streaming partners, of course, but to have this big monetary dependence, it's like already demonstrably unhealthy for the show that it's happened. So we've got a bunch of big special effects. I would rather they like they say, go back to filming it in closets and on $5 an episode. I mean, we just did the Kilts of Peladon for the regular Pull to Open podcast. Right. And we were admiring, as cheap as it looked, that the boldness of it. And it didn't affect what was a really nice story about, this interesting planet and with a sort of a political backdrop. And, it didn't matter that it cost nothing. Like the imagination, the storytelling was there. Let's go back to that sense.
Yes. And the same is true in a lot of New Who, including the story that we went to after Curse of Peladon, which it was the caretaker immediately. Was it the caretaker immediately after? Anyway, the last one, the next
Android
one,
Invasion, sorry.
Android Invasion. Then okay. So you've heard Android Invasion, you know that we go to caretaker next. Like, that's both of those are example of cheap Doctor Who, right? The caretaker had some deliberately cheap episode, and that's what most of Doctor Who has been. Like, even in the New Who, they would save their money for the big season enders, right? So you've got a lot of stuff like the caretaker. So I think we saw the problem of limiting it to a certain number of episodes per season really meant. I think it is the reason why a lot of these loose threads that we're talking about were left hanging, because they're just like, you can be the best writer in the universe and not tie this all up and not do all the jobs you have to do in 8 episodes, right?
Yeah, the 8 episodes is not great. It is. I don't know if they'll ever get it back, though. I mean, I think there's just the way things are made, the time it takes, all the layers they put on. I think you just have to make it differently or just commit to something. But I do think when you have 8 episodes, like we were just talking about, if someone like Belinda is not given a great script, well, that's 1/8 of her entire journey, So like you can't just waste it. I think there is a case to be made that if you're going to do that few episodes, that Doctor Who might work better as more serialized, more of like an arc, a la Trial of a Time Lord or Flux for each season, because I think it is just too short to try to sort of develop sort of an episodic rhythm,
right?
And I think you really got to get up to at least 12 per season to really get that feeling, which I think that was sort of the standard up until the late Whittaker stuff. The new Who standard. I mean, it doesn't always work. I mean, we definitely had a lot of filler episodes in the Tennant and Matt Smith era, so I think that was too expansive and too sort of bitty. But I bring it down to 8 episodes. It's too much. I felt like simultaneously pumped too much money in and cut Doctor Who to the bone. It was a very strange combination. Well, it's also like so unfortunate that Gatwa just wasn't there for at least 3 of his. I think he made a total of 18 or 19 if you count the giggle.
Yeah,
and 3 is significant once you get down that low, and he kind of wasn't in 73 yards or Dot and Bubble.
That is true.
And Lucky Day. I mean, he's in him, but I mean, the Doctor's not really a presence. So
I like that though. I mean, call me crazy, but I love those Dr. Light episodes of Doctor Who, and it's a chance to examine the Doctor from a different angle. And of course, one of the greatest of all time, Blink, is Dr. Light. So,
but think about Blink came in season 3, and Dot and Bubble, like those are the first ones out of our mouths when we think, oh, epic Gatwa episodes, Dot and Bubble, 73 yards. Oh wait, Gatwa's not really in them. Like it's
he's more in Dot and Bubble. But no, I mean, I think they just totally hang together as stories, right? And that's the ultimate job number 1. Make it a great story that anyone who isn't a rabid Doctor Who fan or currently wearing a Doctor Who shirt or having a screenshot of Ncuti Gatwa over their shoulder would watch and be like, that was good television,
that
can often be a Dr. Light episode.
Fantastic note to end on, because we are in 100% agreement there. There's an interview James Gunn gave recently, and when this post, it'll probably be a month old, but he did talk about how, as in his reboot of the DC universe with Superman, that he the problem with a lot of other friends, like I think he might have even name checked Marvel on this, like they just had projects that had to go and they didn't have scripts ready, which is obvious in hindsight. But it is like, that is one surefire way to kill your franchise. I'm not saying that's what Doctor Who did, but it is like the prioritization of the effects and just sort of getting this Disney money spent probably did not work in its favor.
Yeah, it introduced too many other complicating factors, too many temptations to not make it about story. Right. I think that's ultimately where we're landing here, which is great. But I will say, from the perspective of someone who's written extensively about Star Wars, if there's anyone out there who is worried about like the long break that we have likely got coming up in Doctor Who and like, what's that going to be like? Guys, just chill. Look, we had 3 years between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Now, this, oh, hello may not be I Am Your Father, but it's still, it's a good enough note to leave it on and just chill. And franchises tend to come back well rested, tanned, rested, and ready. And we will see more great Doctor Who on our screens in the future. And honestly, there may be a little bit of self-interest. We're all rational, self-interested actors, as economists would tell us. And my rational self-interest here is, I really want Pull to Open to get all the way through its random journey in Doctor Who before we get any more of it. So that's where I'll leave it. On that note, from my perspective, my one last thought, let's just focus on the random journey of what is in the history of Doctor Who now, and I'm very much looking forward to that journey. I hope you come with us on it. Pete, what are your last thoughts?
Simply that we might actually get halfway through now that it's on a break, which we've never quite gotten to.
Yes.
We haven't even done half of all the Doctor Who stories that have been televised. Can you believe it?
I know. We will definitely have a celebration when we do that. We'll have a halfway day. We may have another. Another top 100 of the stories that we've covered randomly so far. But yeah, look out for that, and look out for Pull to Open on all your favorite socials. Pete, how can the folks follow us?
People can follow us on TikTok and Blue Sky at Pull to Open, and Pull to Open 63 on Instagram, X, and most other places, actually. You can also follow us on YouTube at youtube.com/Pull to Open in case you're not watching us there right now. And if you are watching us there right now, hey! And why don't you go ahead and consider becoming a true companion of the podcast? You can go ahead and for a low monthly donation, you can then get our eternal gratitude and a whole bunch of emojis that you won't otherwise have access. Plus, you get the podcast early, sometimes several days early. So that's good times.
That's right. Like, subscribe, throw us some coffee money, and you will definitely get the rewards for that. But yes, we'll return to our random journey, which with, I guess, the Caretaker is the next episode?
I think that's actually, we've done the Caretaker. The next one is the Day of the Moon. Or no, yes, Day of the Moon, Impossible Astronaut.
Yes.
I don't know. It's all timey-wimey for us. We're in the middle of recording all this stuff.
I had a sudden fear that we had to do Kill the Moon again, but thank goodness, no, that's in the can. Go back and listen to that one, or don't. But we will see you next time on our random adventure. And until then, goodbye.
All right. Unless it's a parallel universe. Take it easy.